study, and we pray you have as well.
It's so hard to believe we're ready for encounter number 6, but here we are.
Encounter 6 was filmed live just like Encounter 1, and it's a bit longer teaching, so make sure that you are all settled in with your Bibles and workbook.
Yes, get settled because you do not want to miss 1 minute. This encounter with the resurrection is so powerful. You're going to find a space to take notes in your workbook on page 33.
And page 34, because there are 2 pages of notes for this session. We'll see you as soon as Sharon concludes.
Can we just give it up for Jesus tonight, ladies? Amen. 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 You can have a seat. Thank you. Thank you for being here. It's so good to see all of you here tonight. I want to thank our worship team. What a wonderful job that they do. Yes, yes. Amen. Amen. Beautiful, beautiful job. And you know, we don't get to see all the hours and the time. You know, we come and we show up and we get to worship and all the things that go into all of that. And I just want to personally say thank you to every person who has served in any way for this Bible study, because a lot of effort goes into that. And you know what? All of that is done so that the kingdom of God can be birthed in each and every one of us. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you have served in any way, I promise you in heaven, you will get an extra star in your crown. Jesus and I we've already made that agreement, okay? Really, it has been a privilege to walk alongside all of you. For all of us doing this, we're linking arms in this whole small group effort together through this study. It's been a new thing for us this year, and so we've just had eyes wide open to see, God, is this really what you had us do? And it's been beautiful to see the fruit that's come out of it. It's been interesting to walk through the new challenges, and so thank you for any of the flexibility that you had to have, you know, as we did that. But our prayer in our heart has been that each and every person would have moments with Jesus, up close and personal moments with Jesus that bring about life change in your life. And it's been a joy to hear about the testimonies as we've been hearing different things, getting emails, seeing some things on Facebook, seeing somebody in the store and, you know, they share a testimony, something God's doing in them or in their group. And it's just been beautiful. And tonight we're going to even be sharing some testimonies as we move through the night. And so I pray that you're going to be a part of the whole evening together. You know, I wasn't going to say this, but I think the Lord just would have me say this. I hadn't planned to. But you know, I was thinking about, you know, this whole idea, we're going to stay till 10 o'clock. And, you know, for some of us, I know that's a late night. Usually late, it's by 9:15, 9:30. I am climbing in the bed myself, okay? But you know what? If we went to a movie, we wouldn't get up and leave in the middle, right? If it ran a little late. If we went to a concert, we wouldn't do that. And especially for Jesus, we want to stay and experience the things that he has for us. So even if you were planning on leaving early, I don't want you to feel like you have to duck your head and walk out. If you need to do that, you know, we're not, there's no judgment zone here at all. But we do want to encourage you to stay, because you know what? I wouldn't leave if I knew dessert was coming, right? I wouldn't do that. I like my chocolate, all right? And so the dessert comes at the end, at the times of worship that we're going to have together at the end, some of the testimonies that are going to be shared. So I do encourage you to stay. That was all extra. Wasn't planning to say that at all, okay? But let's just see what the Lord would have us to do about that. But we want us to have moments. We want all of us to have moments. And I think that the Lord still has some moments for us here tonight. If you've stepped in close and personal, you've gotten to see Jesus in new ways, he's done some things in your heart, I want to tell you, he's not done. He's not done. And he won't be done at 9 o'clock tonight, okay? He has things for all of us. So let's just step into those moments and let's experience all of what he has through to the end. So speaking of moments, I want to tell you about a moment that I had this past Easter weekend. I was at my church, and let me just say, I love my church. I'm very thankful for that. Yeah, some of my church girls are here. I'm very thankful for the community of believers that the Lord has me worshiping and serving and learning and growing with. And I came to church that Easter with an excitement in my heart. And we should do that, right? For Easter, we should come to church with excitement. We should come to church with excitement all the time, but especially on Easter. And so I was excited, I was expectant, and yet the Lord met me with something I didn't expect at all. Sometimes we step into stories that are very familiar to us about Jesus, and we think, oh, okay, I know all of this, and yet God gives us a fresh view that really moves us in a deep way. And I imagine that's been the case for a lot of us throughout this study, because we've been looking at accounts of Jesus that are familiar to a lot of us. Bible stories that maybe we've read since we were this big, and yet as we've stepped in close, God has shown us some new things. So that's what happened for me at Easter, and I want to tell you about it. So my pastor, he began to preach about the resurrection, and very fitting, right? Because it was Easter. And as we got into the text for that, he shared this view of the resurrection that I had never thought of before. And he said, no one showed up for the resurrection. I had never thought about that before. No one showed up for the resurrection. And during that time of the service, the Holy Spirit and myself had some real moments together. I just was taking notes and thinking through things, and I started on a journey from that time where God began to give me some new vision about the resurrection. Things that I didn't expect to see. I expected to have a great weekend of Easter celebrating the Lord's resurrection, but this whole new idea got opened up to me. And it was actually during that service that the Lord spoke very clearly to me about this encounter, that's what this encounter was to be about. And so I've been stepping into that, and I want to invite you to step in with me. And I want to ask you to think about that. Have you ever thought about how nobody showed up at the resurrection? We're going to go to our text for Encounter 6, and we're going to talk this through. And you probably noticed, if you've gotten your workbooks out, that for the note page that there are two texts listed for Encounter 6, and that's because Encounter 6 is laid out a little bit differently. So I would encourage you to get your Bibles open to both of those passages in Matthew chapter 28 and Luke chapter 24. But let me also put this text in a timeline perspective for us. So after 3 years of ministry and pouring out his life on the earth, we know that Jesus died on the cross, right? Now, we're not studying that as one of our encounters, the crucifixion, but you can do that, all right? You might have noticed in the back of your workbooks that we gave you about 10 extra Bible Study 101 templates. You could take one of those and go into one of the accounts of the resurrection and dig it out and study in it. And I would encourage you to do that. You might have also noticed on our YouTube channel, we have a whole Bible study called Wonders of the Cross that dives into the resurrection as seen in the book of Hebrews. I would encourage you to do that as well. But tonight, we're going to move past the crucifixion, and we're going to move past the resurrection till right after the resurrection actually happened. So go ahead and let's read together. I'll read it out loud for us, starting in verse 1 of Matthew chapter 28. It says, "Now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave." Now this would have been early Sunday morning. And you find Mary Magdalene and then the other Mary. How would you like to be called that? The other Mary, right? Well, there was a lot of Marys in Jesus' circle at that time, and so we don't know exactly which one she was, but at least she made it into the Bible, right? The other Mary. And they come to look at the grave, this says. Now, if you back up a few verses in Matthew 27, verse 57, you find that on Friday night, when Jesus' body was taken off of the cross, that both of these Marys were sitting across from Joseph of Arimathea, who was wrapping Jesus' body to take care of it and prepare it for burial. Now, all of the Gospels give us different views and details about the crucifixion and the resurrection. In the book of John, for instance, we find out that Nicodemus was actually there with Joseph of Arimathea and was helping. This is the same Nicodemus that we met in encounter number 2. Pretty interesting that he's here now, right? It's great to get to know these people and then see them show up and you're like, oh, you really did get it, right? And now you're here and you're showing up. And it's interesting because John tells us a detail as well. He tells us that Nicodemus brings in 100 pounds of burial spices to help prepare Jesus' body. You know, when somebody passes away, a lot of times we want to do something, right? And we feel so helpless because there's really nothing we can do, or at least that's what we think. So we set ourselves to doing something in our little busybody ways. And a lot of times, like today, we'll send a bunch of flowers or we'll bring in 100 pounds of casseroles, right? Well, back then, they would bring 100 pounds of burial spices if you were wealthy enough to have that much, and Nicodemus was. So that's what he did. So Mary, they watch all of this taking place on Friday night. Saturday would have been the Sabbath, and all of the Jews were bound by law to total inactivity on the Sabbath, so we don't really hear about any of them then, except for the very religious leaders who were the ones who turned the day of rest into this rigid, law-bound thing. They actually break the law on this Sabbath. Because if you read in Matthew 27, it tells us that they convened a meeting together, all right? They called everyone together, probably texted one another, we got to go talk to Pilate, all right? And they had this meeting together with Pilate, and they basically told him, we remember, they called Jesus a deceiver. I have a hard time saying that. But we remember that deceiver, they said, he said he was going to rise again on the third day. So we need to get you to post some guards at the tomb so that when his disciples come and try to steal his body, that won't be able to happen because the guards will be there. So a lot of things going on. Keep all that in mind, and now let's settle into Matthew 28. Verse 1 told us that Mary and Mary got up really early to go and look at the grave. But what did they find? Well, verse 2 says, and behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his garment as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. A lot of help they were, right? All right, so we don't know the time that the resurrection actually happened on Sunday morning, but we do know that it was before Mary and Mary got there. They didn't actually get to see the angel swoop in, right? Push back the stone, and then Jesus come forth in all his glory. Nobody was there to see it. This was the most amazing moment in history. Not only was it spectacular as far as earthquakes and angels and all that wow factor stuff, but this was the moment that Jesus defeated sin and Satan and death. He overcame that, but no one showed up to see it. Only heaven and a few of these hired guards that fell out like dead men, this says. Now, you might be saying in your mind, but Mary and Mary came. They just got there a little bit late. And maybe you're somebody that runs late, and so you have compassion for that, you know? But it's not that they were late. It's not that they were late. Matthew tells us that they came to look at the grave. So that's why they came, to just look at the grave. People do that. But if we go over to Luke chapter 24, which is our other text, and by the way, your workbook says Luke 24, 13 through 39. It actually should say 1 through 39, so you might want to make that notation. But read with me starting in verse 1. It says, on the first day of the week at early dawn, they came to the tomb bringing the spices which they had prepared. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. See, this tells us that they were bringing spices. They didn't show up to see the resurrection. They showed up to look at the grave and to bring more spices to put on Jesus' body. This tells us they were not expecting a resurrection. If they were, they would have brought a celebration breakfast and some fresh clothes for Jesus to put on. No, they just brought more spices to add to the already 100 pounds of spices that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea had wrapped Jesus' body in a couple days before. Now, you may not realize this. I didn't either. I actually heard this from my pastor on Easter. But 1 pound of spices would have been sufficient to take care of a body to preserve it for a good long while. So they had enough spices there to keep him bound up in death for years and years and years to come. That tells us they really weren't expecting him to rise from the dead. Jesus' resurrection was not supposed to be a surprise party. See, for 3 years, if you read through the Gospels over and over and over again, Jesus told his followers, I am going to suffer at the hands of the religious leaders. I am going to die, and I am going to rise again in 3 days. He told them that in many ways and many different times. Actually, keep reading with me, and you're going to see that even Mary and Mary get told that as they're standing here in the tomb. We're starting in verse 4. It says, and it happened that while they were perplexed about this, so they'd walked to the tomb, they're standing there perplexed, behold, 2 men suddenly stood near them in dazzling apparel. And as the women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, the men said to them, why do you seek the living one among the dead? He's not here, but he has risen. Remember how he spoke to you while he was still in Galilee, saying that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of these sinful men and be crucified, and on the 3rd day arise again? Now, I'm going to tell you what my opinion is here. I think these 2 men that are in the tomb that just appear, right? And they're in dazzling white. They're not angels. I think Luke described them as men because he really didn't know what else to say. I think that they're the Father and the Holy Spirit. And they're showing up and they're saying to Mary and Mary, don't you remember what Jesus told you? Don't you remember all the times that he told you he was going to suffer and die and be raised again? And you think about it, even the religious leaders knew it, right? That's why they had that meeting with Pilate on the Sabbath to try to protect the grave, because they had heard it as well. So if his followers had heard him say this over and over, wouldn't you think that one of them would have showed up? He obviously knew how to draw crowds, right? We saw that in many of our encounters. Think about all the people that Jesus healed. They knew he could do miraculous things, right? Even think about the ones that he raised from the dead, right? He raised Lazarus from the dead. He raised the son of Nain from the dead. He raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. But none of these people came to see him when he raised from the dead. Not one person was expectant, believing, and showing up, knowing it would really happen. So I want to invite you into the moment that Jesus said to me that day, sitting there on Easter, Sharon, not much has changed. Most of my followers still don't show up for my resurrection. I've been working through those words in my heart, in my actions, and in my thoughts for months, ever since Easter, whenever it was this year, April, I think. I've been pondering these things about the resurrection. And I've asked myself over and over again, am I showing up for the resurrection? See, I can't answer that for anybody else, but I need to be able to answer it for me. And if I get up close and personal with Jesus, he's asking me that question. So for encounter number 6, what I want to do is just invite you into some of the ponderings and questions that I've had about this as I've dug in and looked into this and just been wrestling with the Lord through it over these last few months. So the first one would be this: why didn't they show up? If you go back to Luke 24, I want to read for you starting in verse 8, and we'll start to get some perspective here. In verse 8, we're told that Mary and Mary remembered his words. See, after they talked to what I believe was the Father and the Spirit standing there in the empty tomb, they had an aha moment. Like it was a moment from heaven, like when they got really up close and personal with the God of heaven, and they were like, oh my goodness. Because we're told that then they run to tell all the disciples, and they find the 11 disciples and then a bunch of other of Jesus' followers in this room. And actually, verse 11 here tells us that these words, as they told them, we know that Jesus rose from the dead, it says these words appeared to them, this would be all the disciples and followers of Jesus, as nonsense, and they would not believe them. This gives us a view as to where their hearts were. Now, except for Peter, verse 12 does tell us that he's like, oh, and so he runs to the grave and he actually finds it empty. Good thing that he went now, but why didn't he go before? We're going to enter into a conversation between two of the followers of Jesus that's really going to give us some perspective of why they didn't show up. Start reading with me in verse 13. It says, and behold, two of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were conversing with each other about all these things which had taken place. And it came about that while they were conversing and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began traveling with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. So two of the guys that were in the room, they decided they're going to Emmaus that day. And they're talking about all this stuff that's been going on. I mean, definitely, they probably would do that, right? Because it's just so present in their minds. And I love this. You gotta feel the dynamic of this moment, because Jesus just appears and just kind of eases into their conversation. And verse 17, he asked them, what are these words that you're exchanging with one another as you're walking? Do you feel that moment? He knew, right? He knew exactly what they were talking about. Verse 17, it also tells us that they stood there, like they just stopped and looked at him. Like, I think in their minds, they're probably thinking like, really? Like, you don't know? And verse 17 tells us that they're very sad as they look at him. And verse 18 tells us that one of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things which have happened here in these days? Now, I'm surprised Jesus didn't look right back at him and say, are you a follower of Jesus and still unaware of the things he told you over and over again? But Jesus didn't say that. I would have said that, but Jesus didn't say that. Instead, he just said, what things? Like he didn't know. So interesting to me. And they let it all come tumbling out. Verse 19 says, they said to him the things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word and in the sight of God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him up to the sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, it's the third day since these things happened. But also, some women among us amazed us. When they were at the tomb early this morning and did not find his body, they came, saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Can you just hear them like going, you know? And some of those who were just with us went to the tomb, and they found it exactly as the woman also said. But him they did not see. Do you see how they are all caught up in all these things that have been taking place in these days? It's like I can hear their breathlessness as one after another, they're just jumping in. And he said, and she did this, and they went there, and we did this, and this is what we thought, and they're just all caught up in these things. Their words, their actions, their thoughts. So much so that they don't even recognize that it's Jesus who's with them. They're all caught up in these things, but they forgot the one thing that Jesus had told them over and over again. I think that's one of the reasons why they didn't show up. They were just all caught up in these things. I also believe one of the reasons they didn't show up was anxiousness. They were all caught up in it. The other morning I was walking and praying, and the Lord just dropped something into my heart, a thought I had never thought of before. And it was a definition of anxiety. And he told me, he said, Sharon, anxiety is a toxic combination of fear and grief. And the reason it's so toxic is because it separates people from my promises. These guys were filled up with grief. Verse 17 told us how sad they were. But you hear that sadness in all that they just have, relayed out to Jesus here. And definitely fear. It's all over the accounts of the crucifixion in the Gospels and how his followers had to deal with all that was taking place. I mean, there was definitely all kinds of trauma going on in the last days leading up to these moments. When you've got traumatic things like that going on, fear and grief can mix together and be like this toxic wave that about takes you under. And I know a lot of us know exactly what that feels like. No doubt Jesus' followers had heard him say again and again, this is going to happen. But don't you know, it's one thing to hear it. It's a whole nother thing to experience it, to see it, to walk in it, to be up close and personal to it. And it was just all too much. And they got caught up in this toxic mixture that separated them from what Jesus wanted them to see. And they didn't show up. I think that's one of the reasons why. But one more thing too. Jesus didn't make that sarcastic comment that I mentioned a moment ago. But you know what he did say to them? Verses 25 and 26, he said, "O foolish men, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory?" See, I think they got all caught up in having a slow heart. Now, in that day, just like today, there's certainly lots of people who do not believe in Jesus at all, right? Pilate, the religious rulers, the mocking crowds, they did not believe. And we would not put Jesus' followers in that category, not at all. And Jesus didn't either, right? But he did say this about them. He said they were foolish and slow of heart to believe. Foolish and slow of heart to believe. After 3 years of walking with Jesus, you would think their hearts would be amped up and strong in faith. And yet they're not. They're slow of heart. They were caught in the middle. Now, what do I mean by caught in the middle? Well, think of it like this. I think we like to classify people in one of two ways. We put them in categories of being unbelievers or believers. But I think Jesus gives us another category here, and it's the slow of heart to believe. It's not that you don't believe, but it's not that you really believe either. You're caught somewhere in the middle. And that's the foolishness of it, because you get stuck. You get stuck right there in the middle. And I think that's what happened to them, and that's one of the reasons as well they didn't show up. The problem with that whole scenario that we just talked about of being stuck in the middle is that's where so many people dwell. Jesus said right here that these two guys were slow of heart to believe. As I've stepped in closer to this encounter, Jesus has shown me that's one of the reasons why so many of us don't show up at the resurrection in our own lives either. Because we're slow of heart to believe. We're not unbelievers, but we don't really believe either. Now, we're going to talk about that some more in a moment, but first, I want us to look at Jesus' response to these people when they didn't show up. I mean, these were his people. And this was his most important moment ever. How disappointing. And yet, how does he respond to them? Well, keep in mind that Jesus is God. We have talked about that all throughout this study. And we're going to look back at a few things that we've already touched on in Matthew 28 and in Luke 24. In Matthew 28, for instance, in verse number 2, that angel that was sitting on top of the stone, he had pushed the stone away. Jesus, being God, would have been the one that would have given him his assignment for the day. So it was Jesus who told him to climb up there on that stone and sit there and wait for the people who were coming. Because Jesus knew they were coming. He knew they were coming to spice him up a little bit more, but he knew they were coming, right? So he said, stay there and wait for them because they're going to be here, all right? They didn't show up when they should have, but they're going to be here. In the next verse, too, it tells us that they looked, or he had the appearance of lightning. I love that, because you know what it shows me? That Jesus saved some of the wow factor for them. See, we don't get to know any of the details of what all the glory was like when he came out of the grave because no one was there to see it, but he saved some of the wow factor. He could have been like, you didn't show up, you don't get any of the wow factor. But he let them see some of the wow factor. He let the appearance be like lightning. He also met them in their fear and questions, right? I mean, the Father and the Spirit show up inside the tomb and start talking to them, and they also are in dazzling, apparel here. They get to be in the empty tomb, and he gives them directions to tell the disciples, and I'm piecing these two accounts together, but you see these things. And even in Matthew 28, if we had read further, we find out that they actually get to run into Jesus on the road, like Jesus comes back to talk to them. You know what I see in all of that? Patient, merciful goodness. Jesus did not have to do any of that. None of these guys deserved, or these girls here deserved any of this, and yet Jesus was so good to them. He turned a moment of chaos and fear and unbelief and being slow of heart into another opportunity to believe. And you know what, ladies? We have been talking throughout this whole study about how Jesus meets us where we're at. Do you remember on that first night, we talked about how some of us might be way over here and Jesus is way over there, and you feel so far. Have you not seen Jesus meet you where you are? And you know what? That's exactly what he's doing right here. And what about the two that are on the road to Emmaus? Let's look at his response to them. After he told them that they were slow of heart and foolish, and I don't think he said that in an angry way. I think it was a very tender tone. But look what it says in verse 27. And beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures. So they're walking, they're talking, and Jesus is like giving them a Bible study lesson. He's helping them to really see the scriptures. He goes all the way back to Moses. I imagine he talked to them about the serpent that Moses put up on the pole so that they could look and be healed. And then he connected it to the crucifixion. I imagine he talked to them about the Passover lamb, and then he talked to them about the crucifixion. And what about the prophecies? I bet he talked to them about Isaiah, because Isaiah was the one who talked so much about him. I bet he shared with them the prophecy that Isaiah had said, a virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and you shall give him the name Emmanuel. He talked to them about how the Messiah was going to open blinded eyes like this guy named Bartimaeus, right? And I bet he told them about how the Messiah was going to make the rough places smooth, just like Isaiah had prophesied. I think he talked to them about all these different things. That's what this says. And he takes it and then he moves it right into the moment that they're at, making it so clear that they could see. It's beautiful. They had a 7-mile walk, so there was plenty of time for a very long Bible study lesson. But you know what the beautiful thing is to me? Is that when they get to Emmaus, they don't want him to leave. They're like, we want more. And so they invite him to stay for supper. They invite him to stay for supper because they wanted to hear more. Their slow hearts are beginning to beat a little bit faster. And look at verse 30. It says, it came about that when he had reclined at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it, and breaking it, he began giving it to them, and their eyes were opened. I think they were remembering back to another time, a time before this where they had sat around the table with Jesus and he had broken the bread, and all of a sudden their eyes are opened. I wonder what that was like for them when they realized, because it says here in verse 31 that they recognized him and he vanished from their sight. Every time I read this, it's like my heart starts beating faster, because what a moment for these guys, right? What a way for Jesus to respond to them when they don't deserve it. His patient, merciful goodness. This isn't normal stuff, right? This isn't stuff that happens to us every day. This is resurrection, heaven-filled life stuff. This kind of stuff that happens when we let Jesus get all up in our business, right? And walk with us and talk with us. And we don't push him away because we've already spent a few minutes with him. But we say, no, stay for supper. I want to hear more. That's the kind of stuff that happens. We get revelation of Jesus. We get to see him for who he really is. I love stepping into this moment and seeing how Jesus showed up for them, how he did this for them, even throwing in the wonder and the surprise and some wow moments for them that they missed because they weren't there to see it when they should have been. How mercifully good. Can you just say those words with me? Mercifully good. Burn them in your heart. Remember, that's who our Jesus is. Now, their hearts are not slow anymore, not at all. Their hearts are burning within them. Actually, in verse 32, it says, and they said to one another, were not our hearts burning within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining the scriptures to us? It was like every word he said, their hearts started amping up and beating even faster. You know, every one of them should have been there when Jesus rose from the dead. They should have been waiting with a resurrection party, right? But they weren't. So instead, Jesus brought the party to them. He brought the resurrection party to them so that they could celebrate. Jesus is mercifully good and patient with us. Step in and see it. You know, there's a whole lot of details to take in, and I know that. And we're certainly not even covering all of them. I'm skipping down through some verses just so we can get all of this in. But we need to remember, this is not all about getting to know all the details. The details are great, but the details are really there for us so they can be a pathway for us to step into some moments with Jesus that are close and personal, to where we get to know Jesus' heart and he gets to know our heart, just like he did with these two on the road. And their hearts started to burn. What makes a heart burn? What makes a heart burn? When it beats strong and fast. That's true physically, like if you've ever done anything to really make your heart burn physically, you know that. That's also true spiritually. And I can just know that their hearts were beating physically and spiritually, burning as they're running back to Jerusalem, because that's what they did. It tells us that they ran back to Jerusalem to tell the other disciples. And I bet they were saying to themselves, we should have been there. Why did we miss this? Oh my goodness. And you know what? I get it. Because I often find myself in that place as well. I find myself with a slow heart. I find myself caught up in all the things happening around me. I find myself anxious sometimes because fear and grief take over in my heart. And somehow, even though I don't mean for it to happen, I get stuck somewhere in between unbelief and then really believing. And I don't show up for the resurrection life that Jesus has promised me. Since this past Easter, I have been keenly aware of some moments where Jesus steps into my conversations and says, what are these things you're talking about, Sharon? And I tumble all my words out, and then I hear him say back to me, oh, foolish and slow of heart to believe. And he takes me back into his word and reminds me of who he is and shows me that he is the resurrected one who has promised a life for me and invites me again to come to the resurrection. And I know that many of you can identify with that because he's walked and he's talked with you too. He's explained himself, right? Anybody in the house, right? He's revealed himself to you. He's increased his name in you as the sun comes up every morning. Aren't we grateful for his merciful goodness that shows up in those moments when we're slow of heart to believe? But here's the thing, ladies. As I've stepped in close to this encounter, I believe with all my heart the word that God has for us in this encounter is this: we don't have to keep missing the resurrection. We can actually show up. See, when Jesus resurrected from the grave, not only did that mean he was alive, but that meant he was offering life to us. He died in our place, and then he extends that life to us. And we've talked so many times in this study about how our dead spirits have to come to life. That's what it means to be a Christian, to be born again. We saw that in Encounter 2, and we've mentioned it over and over again. And you may have never thought of it this way before, but when you received Jesus, when your spirit was born again, you know what you did? You showed up at the resurrection. You showed up at the resurrection and you said, Jesus, I see that you're alive. I see that you have life for me. I believe in you and I want that life, and he graciously just gave it to you. That's who he is, and he does that for us. Praise the Lord that he gives that to us and he allows us to come to his resurrection so that our spirits can be born again. And I want to say tonight, it is my prayer that every person who ever walks through this study will be born again. There is no reason to not show up at the resurrection and have your spirit born again. That's where it all begins. And if you haven't done that yet, you certainly can do that tonight. It's so, so important. But you know what? The resurrection of Jesus definitely affects our spirit. That's where it all begins. But it also affects every part of us. When sin entered the world through the sin of Adam and Eve, there was sin that ran the gamut. It affected everything. So it doesn't just affect our spirits. It affects our souls and our bodies as well. Think of it this way. It affects every nook and cranny of who you are. So you need the resurrection life in every part of who you are. We all do. Now we know this is true about our bodies, right? We want to think that it's not, but we all know that these bodies are not going to last forever. We put our lotions and potions and creams and all those things on our bodies, hoping, right, it's going to make some kind of difference for those wrinkles. The older I get, I'm realizing it doesn't work. It just doesn't work, all right? I mean, we eat organic food, we do all the things, and I know, I do that too. But deep inside of us, we know these bodies are not going to last forever. Praise God for the good word that he gives us in his word, that we get a new body in heaven one day, right? I'm really looking forward to that body the older I get, okay? And what about our souls? What about our souls? Our minds, our wills, and our emotions. Death absolutely affects these things. Our souls experience one death blow after another every single day as we walk through this life with the sin in us and the sin around us that affects us. Lies, confusion, resistance, worry, anxiety. I mean, it's just like it attaches itself to our thoughts and to our will and to our emotions. I love what Paul says in Romans 8:11. He's writing to people who've been born again, and he says, the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. And just as he raised Jesus from the dead, he will give life to your mortal body. In other words, your life now. So his spirit's already alive in you. He's talking to people whose spirit's alive. And he says he also wants to give life to your mortal body by the same spirit living within you. There is surely a resurrection for the lives that we're living now. Jesus told his disciples, I've come to give you life abundant. It is Jesus' heart to swallow up death in every way with his life. He tells us that again and again in his word. Just like he told the disciples over and over and over again, I'm going to rise from the dead. He tells us, I'm going to give you life. I have life. Don't you want life? Come over here and get some life. He says it again and again. So, how do we show up? How do we show up for the resurrection today? We can't go back 2,000 years ago and sit in front of the tomb and hope that Jesus is going to walk out, because he already did that, right? So what does that mean when we say show up for the resurrection? I mean, it preaches really well, but what does that look like? How do you actually do that? Well, I believe it is a camping out in front of death and expecting life. If he's told us that we have life for our spirit, souls, and bodies, then every time we experience any kind of death, right? And we're not just talking physical death, but the way that death affects us. We've already mentioned some of that, all right? Anytime it affects us, we ought to show up, look at that death in the face, and expect life. It doesn't make sense in the natural, not at all. But that's what we should be expecting. But here's what often happens. Just like Jesus' followers should have been camped out by the tomb, sitting right in front of the tomb, waiting for Jesus to come out, and they weren't, and we've talked about why. Too often, we're exactly like them. We see death, and we run from it, we hide from it, we try to spice it up a little bit, whatever we can do, because we're all caught up in these happenings, these things that are going on all around us. he said this, she said that, they did this, the doctor said this, I don't know what to do about this happened yesterday, and we talk about it, and we think about it, and then we talk about it some more, and then we think about it. This morning I was talking with somebody, I said, it's like we put those thoughts in a crock pot, so we can just keep eating them over and over and over again, right? Just simmer all day long in me and let them just take over, right? These things. Then we get caught up in the anxiousness because there's real life junk going on. Sure enough, it produces fear and grief. And we get caught up in it. And it's toxic. And it begins to separate us from the promises of God. And then we find ourselves stuck somewhere in the middle between unbelief and belief. And we wonder, how did I get there? You know what? We cannot show up for that moment that Jesus walked out of the tomb. He already did that, right? But we can sit in front of the death that we face every day and expect him to bring life, because he told us that he would. I want to paint a picture of that for you as practical as I can, so that we will have some real practical things that we can do to show up for the resurrection. And I think a good way to do that is just to use the word sit, as if you would sit in front of this death, like the disciples should have been sitting there in front of the death of the tomb, waiting for Jesus to walk out, and just use this as an acronym. So let's first think of S. We need to speak life. Speak life. It's very natural to talk death talk, how bad things are. Let me tell you about all the details again and again. Let me write a long page on Facebook and tell everybody how bad it is and all the details of all of this. And we just speak death, we rehearse it, we put it in the crock pot, whatever you want to think about that, okay? Instead, what if we took that energy and those words and we spoke life? We spoke what Jesus has promised us. We speak in prayer and in conversation words of life. You know, you think about the followers of Jesus. If they had shown up at the tomb with strong faith, they would not have been saying, oh, I don't think he's going to be able to do it. I don't think he's going. Do you remember how bad it was when they put him on the cross? Did you see those nails and the holes in his hands? And did you see how much blood came out of his head? I don't think he's going to be able to rise from the dead. That's not what they would have been saying as their chairs were sitting there waiting. They would have been saying, you remember that time we were in Galilee and he talked about how he's going to rise from the dead? And you remember that other time we were sitting in the boat and that other time down by the shore? He said it again and again. Yeah, let's watch. They would have been speaking life because they would have been expecting life if they had really showed up. So speaking life. The I would be inclining our actions toward life. See, it's one thing to say it with your words. It's a whole other thing to do it with your action. When we would naturally be inclined to respond to death with just more death, which is what most of us do, or we just try to spice the death up some way or another, instead we need to respond in life, doing the things that Jesus would do. You want to know what life-giving things are? Just study the life of Jesus. He was full of life. It oozed out of him. That's why he could respond with such gracious, wonderful, merciful goodness to these people, because that's life-giving, right? That's life-giving. And we have to have those kinds of actions as well. When Mary brought spices to the tomb, she was not inclining her actions toward life. She was inclining her actions toward death. So we speak life, we incline our actions toward life, and we think life. In other words, we don't allow things that are not life-giving to enter our mind. And if they try, we shut them off, and we turn them off, and we put other thoughts into our mind instead. It's natural to think death thoughts. It's where we naturally want to go, but we know Jesus has life, so we show up for that life. Speaking life, inclining our actions toward life, and thinking life. It doesn't feel natural. When death touches our lives in all the different ways that it does, whether it's sickness in our bodies, or strife in a relationship, or bondage to sin, or the death of a loved one, or feelings of insecurity, or brokenness, or ugly attitudes, or rebellion, all the different ways, we're naturally drawn to getting all caught up in it. But instead, with strong hearts, ladies, burning for the things that Jesus has told us, we need to look at that death in the face and say, death, where is your victory? Death, where is your sting? Because there is none anymore. Jesus has given us life. And it's not something that we just have to wait for in the by and by. It's something we're supposed to be experiencing now. Tonight, I can't speak into every kind of death that happens. We could all talk about all the different ways death has affected us. And I can't tell you what life is always going to look like either. I mean, look around the world. Jesus has created life in so many different ways, right? He's so creative. And when you think about it, when he told them he's going to rise from the dead, he didn't tell them what it would look like. He just said he was going to do it. And that's what he tells us. And he asks us to trust him to bring forth life. I have seen enough people in my walk with Christ who have shown up at the resurrection, experience life, that I know that it happens. I've seen broken relationships brought to life again. I've seen supernatural peace just come in like a flood when a family loses a loved one and they pass from this life to the next. These are life-giving things, life gifts from the Father. New understanding of God's love can just rise up in people, coming to life. Purpose can come to life. Confidence can come to life. Faith can come to life in people. New revelation of God's ways. Forgiveness can come to life. Provision and all these different things can come to life in us. Life comes forth. Jesus brings life to people who show up for the resurrection. Why would we ever settle for death? Why would we ever stay away? I don't know why we would when he's promised us life. I want to share just a few real life stories of some people who have shown up. I love testimonies. Testimonies put it into real life for us and help us to see that these things are really real. It's not just stuff that happened there for them. This is stuff that Jesus wants us to see here, and it happens for us too. I'm not going to share the real names of these people, but I want to tell you some of their stories. So let me tell you about Mary. Recently, her father passed away, and they had been praying for healing for a long time for him as he's been sick, but he did pass away. They knew that possibly could happen. And when I heard the news, I really just, as she's my friend, I wanted to comfort her, I wanted to pray for her, and I certainly did those things. But I was amazed at how she showed up for the resurrection in these moments in her family. Every time I turned around, I'm telling you, literally, I was getting text after text from her of scriptures just talking about the new body her father had gotten in heaven, talking about heaven, talking about the resurrection of life. She was so situated in front of life, thinking life, speaking life, inclining her actions toward life, sharing these life-giving things with her family. It was beautiful. But you know what? Let me tell you about something that sprang up for her family in the midst of this, some life that Jesus just brought forth. There's been a very, very broken relationship in her family for a long time. And it's been between her and another person in her family. And I've watched my friend for several years show up and sit and look at the death of this relationship and expect life. And it made no sense because this other person treated her horribly. Even when she would speak life and incline her actions toward life, there would be more hurt coming back. But I would watch her do life-giving things. I would hear her speaking in prayer life over this, even when I knew it was hurting so bad. And she would not allow herself to think any other way than that one day Jesus is going to resurrect this relationship. Do you know that through the death of her father, hearts have been tender, and this relationship is springing up to life. And it has been the most beautiful thing to see. Jesus really does bring dead things to life. I think about someone I'll call Janice. Before she was even born, her mother suffered a deep, deep hurt that just left her in the bondage of pain. And you know, sin is very destructive because not only does it affect the person that it affects, but usually then it spills out on everybody else around them. And that's exactly what it did in her family. And so for Janice, even as a little girl, she dealt with a lot of the pain that flowed out of her mother's own life as her mother was in the bondage of the death of that sin that had been done to her. But when Janice came to know Jesus and began to get into his word, she began to see that he had life for her. And she began to show up and expect this life for her. And he has restored and brought life to so many broken and dead things in her own heart. But here's the beautiful thing to me as I watch Janice. Not only is she showing up for the resurrection for herself and has done that, and Jesus has just resurrected so much, she's standing in the gap for her mother. And she's speaking life over her mother, even though there's been a lot of hurt. She's doing things. She's inclining her actions toward life toward her mother, even though there's still a lot of hurt coming back at her. And she's thinking thoughts of life. And even this week, God has given her a very specific assignment. So I would ask that you pray for Janice in your heart right now, because her mother is in the bondage of hurt and death, and God has life for her. And it's so beautiful to me to see how Janice is willing to show up for the resurrection for her mother. And we have to do that for one another. We have to show up for others as well. I think about a friend I'll call Carol. She's showing up and standing in the gap for her son who is addicted to heroin. And she's believing and speaking life and inclining her actions to life. She's staring at that death in the face and knowing that Jesus is going to bring life. Is that easy? No. I think about my friend Kyra. Her marriage fell apart based on adultery. It was horrible. And yet she stared that death down in the face, and Jesus is beginning to bring up life. Has it been easy? Absolutely not. I think about another woman I met at a retreat one time. I'll call her Susan. Her desire had been to be married and have a family, and she watched as one death blow after another just took those desires away. She knew that God had given her this desire. At 39 years old, she was still not married, still no babies, and thinking, it's over. It felt like total death to her. A friend of hers encouraged her to step out of the middle and get into a place of belief and start staring that down and speaking life and inclining her actions toward life and thinking life. And when I met her, she was 41 years old. She had gotten married the year before, and she had a little baby bump because she was expecting her first baby. Jesus brings things to life. Now, does it always turn out the way we want? No. There's a lot of times, because death is so ugly, that things really look like death. Like the person really dies, or the dream dies, or the relationship absolutely is over. But that doesn't mean that death still has a sting, because we can show up still and see life. We're not sure exactly what it's going to look like, but I've seen it enough to know that when we show up for the resurrection, Jesus does not disappoint. He does not disappoint. And he comforts us in our sorrows, and he'll meet us in those places of death. But ladies, we have to show up. And I want to share this with you too. This is so important as we think about showing up for the resurrection. Many times when we show up, we're going to be the only one there. We're going to be the only one there. Everybody else around us is going to go, that is nonsense. Just like the disciples said to Mary and Mary once they finally had their moment. They're not going to think that even make sense, that we would show up and believe something like that. But I want you to know it's okay if you're the only one there. No one showed up when Jesus resurrected either, only heaven. And heaven will be there with you. Death is ugly. It's not fun to talk about. And we're not just talking physical death. We're talking all the ways that it affects us. The other night, as I've just been meditating on this and thinking it through, I had a dream, actually, that just really shook me up. I had these bees all around me. I don't like bees. I don't like one bee, much less a bunch of bees. And it was like they were attached to me. And then I saw this big bee, like she was like the queen bee. I've never seen a queen bee, but I mean, in my dream, she was huge, okay? And she had these big old eyes that were evil. And she was like staring me down. This was all in my dream. And I woke up with just like this, what was that? And the Holy Spirit began speaking to me about how ugly death is. and about how it swirls all around us. And there are things that are so ugly and feel so evil in our lives, and so much like it's over. It's like that queen bee staring us down. But the Holy Spirit was reminding me, Sharon, even in those moments, and I felt like it was for all of us to hear, even in those moments when it's that bad, we can show up and we can stare that death back in the face. We can look back at that thing and say, death, where is your victory? Death, where is your sting? Jesus has resurrected. Thank you. Yes. Amen. And see, ladies, we have to show up. We have to show up. We've got to allow our hearts to get out of the middle and move over here into a place of belief. Nobody else may agree with us about that, but we can know it because we've been walking with Jesus and talking with him, and he's been showing us life, that he is the resurrected one. That's the name that I would give to Jesus in this encounter. Resurrected one who resurrects things in me. Resurrection life should be the reality for every Christian. The reality is many of us live in places of defeat and death, and I'm one of them, but not anymore. I'm making a decision to show up for the resurrection anytime that death affects me. It's so good to me to look at this and to see how mercifully good Jesus was when they didn't show up. Because, I need his mercy. And I need him to come and walk beside me and talk to me and say, Sharon, what are these things that you're talking about? I need him to look at me and say, oh, foolish and slow of heart to believe. I need him to do that. And so do not allow anything to put you under condemnation if you've been in the middle. See this word for what it is. Jesus will meet you and he'll talk you through it. But you're gonna miss some of the wow factor if that's where you live all the time. So tonight, he's calling us as we move out of this study and we face the death in our lives of all the different ways that it's here, and I know that it is, right? There's bees swirling all around us all night. That's all right. The mother bees, some queen bee somewhere in here too, that's all right. Because we know Jesus, who's the resurrected one, and we can show up. We can show up and expect life. He has it for us. We're gonna enter into a moment of prayer. And we're actually gonna just call this all right here an altar tonight, all right? We have some women who are gonna come up, if they'll come now. Some of our hosts and some other women who are just prayer warriors who love to pray for women. And if you would like for them to pray for you, I wanna invite you into 2 moments. Maybe you need to have one of those conversations with Jesus and let him ask you, what are these things you're talking about, right? Maybe you need to come. Whether or not you have one of them pray for you or not, or you just use this, it's good to get your body in a different position. It's good to get your whole being up and move somewhere else. So it's not just something you're thinking in your mind, but you're doing it with your whole being. So come to the altar and pray. Let one of them pray for you. Also, many of us in this room tonight need to have a show up moment. We need to stare that death down in the face. We need to look at Jesus as the resurrected one and say, I know you will bring life, speaking life, inclining our actions toward life, and thinking life. Ladies, let's show up. Let's enter into a time of prayer and show up for the resurrection. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Hi, ladies. We want to encourage you to enter into a time of prayer and reflection. And for many of the women that were there that night, myself included, it was such a special time. And so on page 35 of your workbook, there are some steps there that will help lead you into a time of prayer and reflection.
And before we finish this journey, we want to pray this prayer together, the scripture prayer that we've been memorizing throughout this study. And we're going to do that in just a moment.
Before we do that, I want to encourage you to turn to page 37 in your workbooks. There, you're going to find a page entitled More. And this page is just going to help you to continue to use the tool of Bible Study 101. And it also offers suggestions of passages that you can use. And so, in the back of your workbook, you're just going to find more templates for Bible Study 101.
And make sure to check out our website, establishedfootsteps.com, and our Facebook page, Established Footsteps Ministry, so you can continue to be encouraged as you walk through the Word daily with the Lord.
So as we close, let's pray this prayer together.
May his name endure forever. May his name increase as long as the sun shines. And let men bless themselves by him. Let all nations call him blessed. Blessed be the Lord God, the God of Israel, who alone works wonders. Blessed be his glorious name forever. And may the whole earth be filled with his glory. Amen and amen.